Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's podcast. We have on a very special guest this week, a guy named Maor Appelbaum. And man, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff to talk about with Maor. Maor is a mastering engineer, and he's worked with some pretty tremendous artists. Faith No More, Sepultura, Yes, Matisyahu, William Shatner, Eric Gales, Meatloaf, hip-hop artists like Lupe Fiasco. He's even worked on video games and soundtracks, games like Fallout, Elder Scrolls, whole bunch of cool stuff. And I think he has a really interesting approach to thinking about color and taking records in the right direction that we can learn about not only if you're into mastering, but on the mixing end too. And I think his process and approach and the way he thinks about getting color on records is a really interesting one. So I'm super excited to have him here. Maor, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on the show.
All right. Before we dive into it, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to Maor about. You can see in his mastering studio, he'll give us a tour later, I hope. He has a significant amount of gear, I think, compared to even the average high-end mastering studio. And you also see he has 3 sets of speakers, which is interesting for a mastering engineer. I want to ask him about that and about acoustic treatment, the way his room sounds, because I think it's an approach that's slightly different from other rooms. Before we do, I got to give you your 90 seconds or so of pure bliss as I shout out this week's sponsors. They include Focusrite. Thanks to Focusrite for sponsoring once again. These guys make some of the best affordable and high-end interfaces probably in the world. One of the most popular entry-level interface lines of all time is their Scarlett range. So if you're looking for something that is portable or a great way to get into audio, the Scarletts are awesome. Right now, you're hearing me talking through a Focusrite Claret, which is a slight step up from the Scarlett line, and they go all the way up to the Red series for networking whole huge facilities together. So if you're in the market for a interface, check those guys out. Also sponsoring this week, SonarWorks, and they make software solutions that basically are going to sweeten the sweet spot in your room. They have software solutions that are going to improve the sound quality that you get out of your headphones. And Maor actually did some development with the guys at SonarWorks. They tested out some of their stuff in his room, perfecting some of their software profiles. If you guys don't know what SonarWorks is a system that helps correct for rooms and speakers' idiosyncrasies. Even if you got a pretty sweet spot in your studio, SonarWorks is there to make it even sweeter than it would otherwise be. So definitely check them out at sonarworks.com. They also have a headphone correction suite that makes headphones extremely neutral compared to how they come out of the box. So their whole game is improving the way you mix or master with your existing equipment. Last but not least, another podcast. If you want more great interviews like this one, check out the Gear Club podcast. You can check them out at gear-club.net. That is gear-club.net. 2 amazing engineers, John Agnello and Stu Lerman, hosting that one. Check them out at gear-club.net. That is gear-club.net. Or just type Gear Club into the Google machine or wherever you get your podcasts. Without further ado, the man of the hour, Maor Appelbaum. Maor, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
All right, dude. How are things in sunny LA? It's very hot there, I imagine, it being July and what have you.
Yeah, it's very hot.
It's still nice there in December, unlike where I am. So, that's how we get back at you. So diving right into it, I just want to ask you a bit about your process. You were telling me a little bit about this before. When you first start working on a record, what are the first things that you're listening for when you're beginning mastering? And what are the first kinds of pieces of gear that you're patching in, the first changes you're looking to make?
Well, the first thing I do when I listen to is try to recognize styling, aesthetics, direction, and also kind of like a memory thing where I listen to it and I have to think in my mind, what does this remind me of? Not specifically a band, but it could be an era, or it could be an environmental thing like, a certain show I went to, or something that connects you with a certain feeling that is in that music. So that's usually where really the important thing, I think, is connecting with it. And you might connect with it immediately, or it might take time, and you might hit the mark or miss it, but that's the first thing I want to go for, is do a really in-depth connection, where I feel the music. And it could happen quick, take time. And then I try to figure if the music needs enhancement on the groove, or if it needs smoothing or making it more uplifting, sizzly, spiky, happy, or it needs to be dark.
So these extremely technical mastering terms, I think that's one of the things that people get wrong about mastering a lot. Is they think that's just this scientific process where you're trying to get like a razor flat frequency response out of records. But it's refreshing to hear you talk about in a way where no, it's like there's so many ways you could take a record, and you're first trying to figure out what direction should we go with this record. And there's a lot of qualitative aspect. That's really the last creative stop, not only the last technical stop, but the last creative stop in a process too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, if you go to a museum and you see a picture, the picture you see is made by the artist, and that's his thing. But what's surrounding the picture, for example, the type of frame or the wall that it's on, and the lighting that's presented on it, that also helps you connect with the picture, because it either isolates the picture from other pictures. It could show contrasts because there's a certain light. It could make focus on it, and if you have a bright background, then it pops up. If you have a darker background, it goes in a bit. So the presentation is very important in order to engage the music in such way.
Yeah, and that's a great analogy. I've never heard that one before, but it's like you could take the greatest work of Rembrandt, right, and then hang it in like a parking garage with oil stains on the ground and dim lighting and the smell of gasoline. And it's like that's a very different experience than seeing it, in a gallery with appropriate lighting in the right environment and all of that. I think it's a great way to think about it. I hadn't quite heard that before. So one of the things that you said that I thought was interesting, and you said it to me before, was sometimes you feel like you need to enhance the groove, and sometimes you feel like you need to smooth out the groove or smooth out the feel. What kind of tools are you looking at to do that kind of thing? Is that a thing that has to do with compressor attack and release times? How do you just think about that aspect, enhancing or smoothing a groove?
A lot of times it's a combination of gear. Could be compressors and EQs. Smoothing is not always connected with actual compressors. Smoothing can be with an EQ that has a certain sound that, let's say, is not as shiny or spiky or sizzly, that will automatically smooth something. To me, every piece of gear is an EQ, and every piece of gear is a compressor. And it doesn't matter how much I'll argue now with audio professionals, every piece of gear is an EQ and a compressor, due to the fact that the signal is going through and something is happening. And if that emphasizes a certain frequency, then you just EQ'd it.
Right.
And if it de-emphasizes a certain frequency, you just EQ'd it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's running slower out just because the electronics are slower, that also compresses it in a way. It changes the dynamics. Instead of getting those spikes, you get smoothness. That's the compression feel, even if that piece was not even a compressor.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are certain devices, maybe, transformer output device where immediately things that go through it sound a little slower and more syrupy just because they are having an effect on the transients and all of that without them even being kind of engaged with an actual boost or cut or dynamic range reduction. I can definitely say there's certain pieces of gear that I've used. Some of the manly stuff comes to mind where you just engage it and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that sounds different. Does it sound better or does it sound worse? So is that one of your first stops rather than looking to EQ something or compress something? You're first maybe trying these different pieces of gear? What's that part of the process like?
Yeah, that basically, that approach is exactly where I head through. Like, I like to experiment with different types of gear to see how it reacts with the music or how the music makes it react. And then if it's pleasing, then it's a keeper. If not, I take it off. And also, once it's a keeper, doesn't mean I stop there. I still try to experiment with a few things and see how I can emphasize that and engage it even more, to the point where I think it's doing the opposite. So I'll listen to elements in the mix that are not frequency related, like specifically, but more feel related. It's not just like, oh, that cut down the 7K, or that cut down the 4K, or like, not trying to be like super technical, 2K, 4K, 1K, 10K. It's not about the Ks, or what's in between. It's more about when I connect it to that piece of gear, I'm not trying to listen technically to it. I'm trying to listen to it as an artist, but as a listener too. Like, as an artist, do I like it? And as a listener, is it pleasing to me? Because I'm the buffer between the production and the listener. We're the last middleman between what they worked so hard and what the person who's going to listen to it is going to react to it. So I'm playing two roles at the same time: the listener and the, not artist, but the person who's working with the artist. And just like a producer or a mixer or anybody in the audio chain, in the production chain, they have a responsibility to bring forward the vision. And sometimes it's a surprising vision. Sometimes you take it to a place that it was not even there, and it could be amazing. It also could be ruined. So you have to be careful. But that's where I approach it. I try to find which pieces of gear emphasize that. And of course, that doesn't mean I run things without moving the knobs. Of
Right.
course, I move the knobs, one click here, two clicks there,
But that's the second stop rather than the first stop. You're first saying, is this piece of gear taking it in the right direction? And then, okay, now that we've established that this is the gear that's doing something right to it without me touching anything, now let's start touching stuff.
It's not exactly like that, because some gear, when you run it through, it's not enough. And you do have to click, one knob there, tweak this there. But so it's not just like running it through and saying, "Oh, is this good?" Well, maybe it's not. It's more of like doing a connection between the gear, and then moving a knob or two, moving finding
Gotcha.
what works. Because
So it's
some
not
gear,
necessarily a neutral thing. So you might be saying to yourself, you know what, I know that this is going to need to have the attack brought out a little bit, so I'm going to do a slower attack compressor, whatever it might be. Let me see how slow attack compression sounds on this one and this one and this one. Or I know I have to do a high mid boost, so let me hear how a high mid boost sounds on this one, this one, this one. Is it a little bit more like that?
I would say it's kind of a combination of how the gear itself sounds, like the term box tone, not boxy tone, but box tone, or the unit sound, just to see if it works with it. But at the same time, I'll tweak. Like for example, there's some of the gear I have here. I know immediately, even before hooking it up, I'll know that it will do something that I might like or not like, and I won't put it in the chain. But certain things, I'll be like, it might fit, and then I'll try and I'll feel like, you know what, it doesn't fit, or
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's actually surprising, it can do something. And some stuff you can do a lot and it will sound really cool, and then you take things off and you're like, I don't need so much to it. It's a trial and error thing, and
Yeah.
that's why it takes a bit more time, at least for me, because I want to make sure I'm hitting the mark as best as I can. And if I did, great. But if not, then I make a note to myself that I need to know what the band wants. And then there's a communication thing where we actually discuss about it. And if they like it, great. If they need more changes, we do the changes. And if they feel it's totally off, then I restart myself and do it again.
Right, right. Yeah, getting on the same page with them in the beginning is always better than getting on the same page with them after you've mastered it, whenever you can.
Right. That's why if I can, sometimes you can't do it because there's not enough communication possible. Band is on tour or whatever. But I try to talk with them, knowing what they don't like
Mm.
and what they kind of like, and to see, if we meet the expectations just from understanding each other, and then being open to changes. It's very important, I think. Like, I include revisions because I don't expect to hit on the first try.
Mm-hmm,
I,
mm-hmm.
I
I hear
I
you.
do it a lot of times, but it doesn't mean it's every day like that.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Just to take this a little bit out of the abstract and get into a little bit more of the specific, can you tell us about, you have a lot of beautiful gear there. Can you tell us about some of your favorite pieces and how you would describe their color, what you're looking for them to do that other pieces don't do?
Well, the way I work is I have this Maslick mastering console, the MTC1X, and it's a transfer console. It has a monitoring section and then the input output, and has 6 inserts. Each insert here has a combination of gear that's cascaded in series. So every time I press like insert one or insert three, I have a few pieces of gear connected, and each one is bypassable. So I'll try like a certain EQ and then a certain compressor. And if I feel the EQ does good for me, but the compression doesn't, then I bypass the compressor and stay with the EQ. Same thing could be the opposite. Some of the boxes are more color boxes, so they'll impart a tone
Mm-hmm.
immediately. And another thing I can do is, because I have all these 6 options in a row, I can cascade 1 or 2 or 3, units from insert one, and then add 1 unit from 3 or from 6, or I can build a different configuration, and I can audition it later on and decide if I still need something or can take it off. And I have floating gear, which is on the side. You don't see it on the desk. I have like racks here of floating gear, different EQs, compressors, and all that. I have in the back there and I have in the side. And then I have like another set of gear. And then the desk itself, which also has a lower part of the desk, has pieces of gear that throughout time I gravitated to more because I personally like the sound. And it also worked with what the clients like.
Yeah.
And so some of it is totally custom made for me. So there, it's like one-off units, or made for me. Some of
Can
it
you give us a quick spin around as you're talking about this, just so we can kind of see what are some of those custom pieces that you might be talking about?
so there's this unit here. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah,
Maor Appelbaum mastering.
nice. You have your own brand.
Well, the company is called Foot Control Systems,
Mm-hmm.
FCS. They're famous for compressors and custom gear. And this is called the Workshop LTDMA. And it's an analog saturator clipper with driving tones and timbre farms and inserts. So that's one of them. There's another one that's in the works now called the Bench, which will
Mm-hmm.
be soon here, which is another design that FCS Roger Foote and I worked on, which is a device that tightens the sound. It makes things tighter and open without much alteration. It alters, but really not much. It's really kind of a safe alteration, I would say, but
Mm-hmm.
still has options. Um, then this is a quite a kind of a quite known now. It's called the Magic Death Eye.
Mm.
This is an older unit that was modified. The newer units have EQs here, but this is not the older. The newer, this is older, so it has a mix wet dry knob
Mm-hmm.
and a dry level, and you turn on either just the compressor or compressor with mix, and it changes the sound between these two. And he put also a specific mod for me. This is 16 tubes. This thing gets hot.
Wow. All of the tubes are right there in that, was it like a 3 rack space unit? They're all just sticking out of the back there?
Yeah, there's like 8 on this side and 8 on this side.
Wow. All right. Is that among one of your more colorful boxes? What do you think are some of the most colorful boxes there in the space? And then my follow-up question, which would be, what are some of the ones that you use the most often, like almost on every master?
Well, this has a bit of color. It's very clean. It's one of the cleanest Varimu boxes I've ever tried. Like Variable Mu, not Varimu, because Varimu is a trademark. Um, but it has a type of color that's really nice. It's not too much. It's really subtle, but you feel it. And this unit just sounds amazing. This is a multiband, an MLA4 Maslick. That's more of shaping, even though you can do shaping the sound because it's like multiband. You can do kind of like tone changes like an EQ. based on the gains, but it's more fixing.
You don't see a lot of analog multiband compressors. Very cool. Massilic makes some great stuff.
There's, I think, like 3 or 4 multibands that are known.
Like a, yeah, right.
This is a Michelangelo EQ from Handy Amps. This is a very colored EQ. It's a very broad stroke. You have just the low, mids, high, and air, and basically it's how much you push it hard, like how much you drive it. I look at it as like a guitar amp, where you do the pre and post, and the frequencies are kind of like very big curves, broad strokes, and you can hear them a lot. So that's a very interesting device. I think nothing else makes the sound of this. So certain things really need it. This is a modified API 2500 compressor. And this is a one-off that Magic Death Eye has built for me. See the Magic Death Eye here, and actually it says Maor here in the middle part. This is a color box that I can, move and push. I like how this sounds, really nice. And then the workshop is something I use a lot because I just need like 1 or 2 clicks, and it's enough for me to make the changes I need. It's very useful and easy to use. The Massive, of course, the console is very good console to work with.
Yeah, that one has the kind of stereo with an elliptical filter on it, right?
This one,
yeah. I've always loved that on that console. We had one very similar, if not identical model at Joe Lambert Mastering, and man, it would be very rare that I wouldn't at least try out the elliptical filter. If we can get your handsome face back on camera for a second, Maor, I don't want to get too deep into every single unit right up front in case we lose any of the people slightly less nerdy than us. So I want to step back a little bit and go slightly more conceptual for a second. I appreciate that dive in there. I want to talk to you real quick about multiband compression because you have a multiband analog compressor there. Why do you engage it? What are the times where you're like, man, I've got to open up the multiband compressor and put it on? Are you using it a lot? Only in special cases? And what are the things that you're listening for or hearing that make you reach for a multiband compressor?
It's not something on a daily use. It's only if I need it. Multibands, most of them change the shape. Most of them, I think, change the shape. So if you want to keep the original sound, you got to be very minimal with them. But sometimes there's a sound to a multiband where something with the low end versus the high end or mids, it works. I had a few projects where things were sounding a bit messy, not because the mixing guy did a great job. It was actually the performance that was not that great. And what the multiband helped is putting the performance in, kind of in a way, gluing it where a single band didn't do it right because the frequencies would jump. So on a single band, it would pump more, where on a multi-band, it would just do this, or kind of like...
Right.
So it danced with the music, and it's not something I have to put all the time, but it really worked for those type of projects where it was needed. It's more of a fixing thing, but it also could be a tone shaper.
You're right. I've approached it a lot in the same way, particularly in the low end. That resonates with me a lot, where particularly if you have a drummer who is just uneven with his kick, or there's a bass kick relationship that's a little uneven and undynamic, rather than squeezing everything, you kind of just focus in on that area where there are maybe occasional resonances, and you can, get a certain greater level of precise control. I've approached a lot in the same way as a low end straightener upper where things are a little messy. I've found that for upper band harshness, I've been relying more and more often on dynamic EQs these days rather than a multiband compressor. But I know that when I was mastering mostly at Joe Lambert Mastering, I used more of a great analog de-esser he had. What happens when you need the kind of discrete control over the top end? Do you ever find yourself using any kind of dynamic processing on the top end, whether it's a de-esser or a multiband compressor or a dynamic EQ?
I have a trick I do with a phone.
Really?
Yeah. It works probably 90% of the times.
Huh.
Yeah, what I do is I call the client and say, put a de-esser on your cymbals or put a de-esser on the vocals.
I love this. All right, you're a smarter man than I.
But only 90% it works. There's 10% that it doesn't.
I hear you. That's a damn good answer, Maor. All right. Do you ever use any digital tools in what you're doing? Do you ever find yourself using any EQs or compressors in the box, or any restoration software? Is it mostly an analog process for you?
I don't do restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's people who do it better than me, and I prefer them doing it.
Right.
Because I like to focus on the music, and the restoration part just takes me to a different place. And so I tell that up front. I'm not the guy.
Yeah, it doesn't suit your personality. I get it.
Yeah, well, not the. Let's say this. I want to put my 100% in the sound of the music.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In terms of digital tools, yeah, I actually, I use EQs and compressors. I actually have digital tools as well. I have a YCQ here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not against software. I use software as well. But the thing that is important for me is that I capture the vibe with the desk. And then from that, I move forward. And then if I need to do some tweaks, I can do the tweaks. But mostly it comes from here. And I this is just a personal thing. I find that every engineer has his connection with gear or non-gear. To me, software is gear. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And when you connect with something very good, you find what fits. And to me, having the ability to move the knobs and find the tone and experiment between the arsenal of stuff, which you guys haven't seen yet because there's more on the side, but the ability to do that lets me custom tailor, if you want to call it, or whatever you want to call it, the tone to the music. And then if there's any need of changes that are additional to that, then a plugin can come in if needed. You know what I mean? It's but I like to get the initial thing right for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I hope this isn't jumping around too much, but a question that's been gnawing at my head for a little while that I haven't got to ask you yet is about your speaker setup. I think it's common to see in mastering studios a single set of speakers, and people are throwing, more money at that one set of speakers than anything else in the room. But here you are with 3 sets of speakers, which is almost more like what you'd expect in a mixing environment than a mastering one. So can you tell me a little bit about how those 3 sets play into your approach, when and how you're listening on each different one, and what kind of purposes they serve?
The main speakers, which is the PMC IB1s, which are connected to the Bryston, that's what I master on. The 2 other sets, they're reference sets in case of. I'll give you an example. There's times that you work on a project and everything sounds really great and you're happy with it, but the client hears something you don't hear. And it's not because they have better speakers or better hearing. It's because they're looking for something, and if they come into this room, they'll hear it because the speakers are high resolution. But in their speakers, they might not. Could be a dB or half a dB of something that will make the difference. So the 2 others are intended for that. So if the client says, I need more brightness, let's say, and when I play it, it's really bright for me, or bright enough, then I'll turn on the other speakers and see if it's not bright there, then maybe half a dB or a dB will do the trick. But hearing it on my set, which already sounds bright, might be, even though you could say, well, that's the main set, but sometimes you kind of have to mimic what a client is hearing. And I chose these speakers because they sound good enough for what they are, I mean, they're actually great for what they are, but they can represent something that is out there.
Right. What are those other two pairs? So the PMC is those speakers. I mean, man, they have some of the most kind of articulate, fast, clean, transient response, and some of the most resonance-free low end you're going to find anywhere, particularly in a speaker that size. But those other two, what are these? One of them a KRK, and what's the other one?
Those are two KRKs. They're KRK V6 S4 and that KRK V4 S4. And there's another set, which is now I put down there, which is a ref tone. Those are like Oratone style.
Sure.
But again, the way I use the speakers, I don't want to mislead myself. So the other set is only when I need to check. And there were times that I would work on a project and then turn those on just to make sure if needed. Right. But it's not all the time.
Gotcha.
The PMC, the IB1s, I'm really happy with them. I think they're amazing. I mean, and they're not super. I mean, they're not super expensive. You know,
they're expensive enough. I mean, those are probably, let's say they're less than $10,000 each, right?
They're together. They're together. I think close to 12.
Together 12, yeah. So they're a little less than 10 per side. So, I mean, that's expensive enough. But yes, in the world of how expensive speakers can go, you could potentially triple that. But I don't know if you're necessarily going to have significantly better results when you triple it or not. I think the biggest thing is, as long as you have speakers that are flat, resonance-free, and you can tell what's going on in the attack and release because the transient response is good enough, then it almost comes down to a little bit of taste after that. Yeah, I've tried the PMC stuff, and there are PMC speakers less expensive than that I would feel comfortable mastering on if I got to know them.
Also, it's the amp, the Bryston 4B SST Square. I think that amp is amazing, and I tried different other amps. You know, there's better amps, there's less good amps. You know, it's a combination. But I'm really happy with the setup. I have these speakers for about 7 and a bit years. Yeah, 7 years and just a bit. And I'm really happy with them. And the good thing is when you have a good set, you can listen to gear and audition. And I've tested so many pieces of gear that came in through this room. And it, you know, you hear it in your environment, in your speaker set, you know, if you like it. You know, you test it on stuff, you know, and you play and, oh, I like the sound. I like the glue of this. I like the smoothness or the high end or whatever it is. You can actually audition stuff really well. And that's why, like, certain projects, you know, I'll pull one of my other pieces of gear from my arsenal because I know how it sounds, because consistently been working on these speakers for 7 years. I've had other speakers that have mastered on, you know, other records, but in the past 7 years, everything that I've worked on was through these. Right. So you kind of know.
That's one of the great things that a mastering engineer brings to a project is knowing their listening environment inside and out. And yeah, that's huge. It's how long it would take you to have to learn another set of speakers as well as you know that one, you know, man, would it even be worth it? So another question here is, do those give you enough low end or do you work with a sub in that room?
I don't have a sub. These go down to 25 hertz, I think.
I think that's plenty low. I've never been a big sub person either. I figure you get speakers that are good enough and you get a room that's good enough. And a sub, I think, is a crutch for people who haven't gotten speakers that are good enough or tuned out their room so it's good enough. That's my opinion about subs, but maybe that's going to annoy some people that I've said it out loud.
I think subs are good when it's part of a set that fits.
Right.
If I put a sub here, it's going to be too much, I think.
Yeah.
Because anyway, this room is not huge. And they go down to 25. The room goes to around 20 or something. And when I work on urban tracks, the low end is so big, you know, you can hear it in your eardrum. You know, it's like somebody pushed the eardrum in. You get a lot of low end here. It's easy to get that here. So, I mean, everything pushes well.
One of the interesting things about your room too is I think the norm that people are used to seeing is absorbers behind the speakers and diffusers in the back of the room. But you have diffusers behind your speakers. Can you tell us a little bit about the design there and how you ended up with that particular approach?
This room, this room, I have it more than 7 years, and before that, I had different acoustics and different speakers, and I was looking to find an acoustician that I can tell him what I want, what I like hearing, like not to tune the room to my liking, but what I'm working on, that it will be versatile enough. And I found this guy in Israel named Jonathan Sheffer, who was doing his PhD in England, PhD in acoustics, and his specialty was binaurals and something very technical there. And I got in touch with him, and he was very interested to work together. So I flew him in here, and I asked him to design the room. And I told him, I'll let you design my room only if you don't use certain things for reference. He says, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't want you to play certain bands to use for reference. If you do, I'll fire you.
Oh, goodness. Can you tell me what some of the blacklisted bands were, or is that a secret?
It's one band. Everybody knows that band. It's like everybody knows that band. And I said, if you're going to play that, I'm going to fire you.
Okay, I think I know who it is.
Okay. And he said, why? And I said, because you can shoot a speaker and the remaining voice coil will still replicate a good sounding record of them. He says, oh, okay, I get it. I said, I'll let you listen to Sting afterwards or anything else you want, which I like, don't get me wrong. But I want you to really focus on getting the room to sound good. And then we're going to bring a bunch of albums that I've worked on and albums I didn't work on. And then we're going to listen. And he took the challenge. And in 10 days, we finished this room. And it was amazing because every person that walked in here, and I'm talking people produced albums that sold millions, and I'm not saying 2. I'm talking about more than 20 or stuff like that. They walk in the room and they're like, how'd you get a room to sound like this? And it's a small room. And it's not me. I didn't get the room to sound like that. It's Jonathan. Anyway, you can't hire him now because he became a researcher for the Ben Gurion University in Israel. And a few years ago, Apple relocated his family. And now he works for Apple.
All right.
So,
very cool.
So he works for them. But anyway, everybody who walked in here said this room sounds really good. And at that moment, after I worked for a while in this room, I understood that I could go further with the speakers. And I had the guy from PMC come here and I said, I want to buy these smaller speakers. And he's like, no, this room can handle the big one. Like, you sure? He says, yeah, let me put them. And he put them. And then after 30 days, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting them. It's like, so it's, by the way, just to your question, the band is Steely Dan.
I know who the band was. As soon as you said yes.
So, because Steely Dan sounds great everywhere. I mean, in a small speaker like this, it's going to sound amazing, right? So anyway, it had to sound good with Sepultura. It had to sound good with any band you want, for Sting, with whatever. So yeah, that's what we did. And then his approach was that every room that is not huge is small. And I asked him, what do you mean, like, by that definition? He says, well, where he comes from in Israel, there weren't a lot of big studios. Most of the studios were really small. So the experience of working in small studios is huge. They built so many rooms there that are small. It's like, it's natural for them. They don't do big studios much. They do halls. So everything that is not a hall is a small studio. You get it?
Right.
So it's either this or this. So his experience was doing a lot of small rooms too.
And it makes sense that if you're in a slightly smaller than, conventional mastering studio, that adding additional diffusion is going to kind of open that space up a little bit more and give you less issues with reflections that might otherwise compromise a smaller room. So yeah, it makes sense to me. Now, obviously, monitoring is something that's important to you. I think it's one of the most important things to any mastering engineer. And I think it's important enough to you that you worked with, to happen to be one of the sponsors on this week's podcast, but I'm interested to hear about your relationship with SonarWorks. You kind of helped them develop some of their EQ curves when they were. Can you tell me a little bit about that relationship and how did you work with those guys?
I don't want to take credit for development. They
Right,
developed
but
it by
you
themselves. I know
helped them. You helped them test what they were developing in a real world environment, right?
when they were in the beginning stages
Mm-hmm.
of the development, I met them at one of the trade shows, and we had mutual people we knew. And they asked me if they can come to my room to measure it
Right.
and, you know, um, run tones. And I said, yeah, sure. And they came here and they measured the room, and they created a profile, and we listened back and forth. And I gave them some of my feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and they used that feedback. And then the year after, they came again when they were in town. So they were here a few times, and I was not the only room they measured. They measured quite a few more rooms, and I
Sure.
think being part of that helped them, improve their product because they had experience with rooms outside what they're working with, and feedback from industry professionals. And later on, when they did that headphone thing, they actually came here also to do that, and I heard it. One of the projects that they were promoting was a Faith No More single that I mastered, and it was what I mastered. That specific single. It came from an album, but it was a different version of a master of that single, and so it was kind of a promo thing with Faith No More and them. They promoted it. They're not the only company who came here to do some R&D. I've had speaker manufacturers come here to test their speakers. KRK were here. Adam were here when they were working on the S3. The later ones, they
Oh,
came
really?
here with the set.
Yeah, I
Uh,
just was reviewing a pair of those literally just yesterday. I was filming my review for the S3Hs. I was checking those out, the new version of the Atoms.
the ones that they came here was the
Those would
vertical
be the
ones.
S3Vs. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Similar, but slightly different drivers. I think the 3H has two 7 inches, and that one is a single 9 inch. But yeah, cool
I don't
speakers.
remember now. It's been a while. But there's other plug-in companies that came here as well. And,
What was the thing that SonarWorks was doing with Faith No More? Can you tell me exactly what that was and how they were involved in that Faith No More single?
when I worked with Fate No More, we did two singles before we did the album. Then
Mm-hmm.
we did the album, which had those two singles, but in different mixes and different masters. And then after the album was out, we did another single that was in the album, but a different master, because those were like 7-inch singles with B sides. So one of the songs, I think it was Cone of Shame,
Mm-hmm.
and they offered a promo that you can hear how the band was monitoring it, listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was comparing to the set of headphones that they were using to listen, and the master that basically came from here.
Right, right. Interesting. Now, I'm curious when you're working with artists, and well, not just artists, but other producers, mixers who often come back to you. How important to the process is you giving them feedback? Are you ever giving people advice as to what they should be doing to make their room and their listening environment better? Are you ever giving your clients advice as to what they could be doing at the mix end to deliver even better releases to you? Are people ever soliciting that kind of advice from you as part of the process and exchange that you have with them?
In most cases, if I can, I do so, because I think that if you can help bring a better mix in by giving suggestions that are acceptable, then the mix is better to begin with. Your job is better because you're not dealing with fixing, you're dealing with improving, with enhancement. I think it's always better if possible, but sometimes the scenario doesn't work because the band is on tour or the band already finished that mix a long time ago and now they're submitting it, or they can't recall because the gear is not there, or the mixer's out of the picture, or whatever can be. But there's records that I've, a lot of them where I called the mixer producer and say, hey, if you fix that essing, or there's a bit too much high end, or something in that low end is too much, or some pointers, and always asking if it's okay if they fix it, and if they can't, I'll work with it as is. But I found that most cases it was helpful and the bands were very happy to get that. If the band were producers or just the producers or mixers, a lot of times they were very open to that feedback, and it made the results better. Sometimes it was just a mix up with the files. They'll send me the wrong file, and then you're like, hey, I got that file that was like totally squashed. And it's like, oh, sorry, let me send you the right one. Or, the mix was cut off in the end. Do you want me to fade that? Or do you have one that is not cut off? Or stuff like that. Or there was something weird, glitch. Um, it really depends on the type of person you're working with, but I'm always open to that. But in some cases, it could be very problematic, and it's walking on eggs. You can break one easily. But I've seen it in a lot of cases. It was super helpful, and sometimes you need to create a rapport with somebody to make it. And sometimes they're open from beginning. I had a band that I just a few weeks ago. I got a project to master, and I called the band and I said, look, I can take your money and master it. Or I can just say, look, guys, you have a lot of problems there that are not mix related. They're recording related in terms of timing. I suggest you put the money you gave me in editing or retracking the drums and editing them and getting a better result than paying me now for me just to do my job. And then it's still not going to be great. And I gave them the money back. I just said, just I don't want to work on it and improve it, but then 2 months down the line, you're like, hey, we should have retracked the drums, or we should have edited, and now we don't have the money, or now we
Right.
want to remaster it and we don't have the money, so we're going to leave it as is. And no, take that money back. Do what you can to improve it. Come back to me if you want some.
All right. Good stuff. Well, we're coming right up near the hour mark. So I know you're a busy man. You got plenty of things to do today. So I don't want to keep you forever. So there's
It's
just a
okay.
couple
I
last.
I told my wife I'm going to be extending it for longer.
All right. Well, I still want to finish getting this tour of the studio. We got through a little bit. You don't have to tell me about every single piece of gear necessarily, but can you give us kind of like a little 180 or 360 view to those who are checking out the video version of the podcast?
Here, let me show you this unit. This is the masterpiece.
Oh, the Neve. Yeah.
It's designed by Rupert Neve, but the
Ah,
company is called Legendary Audio,
okay. Yeah.
and they didn't make
Is the
too many of
Neve
them.
designed masterpiece?
Yes, it's masterpiece by Rupert Neve, the designer, and it's basically like a mastering console with input section, input and output, and then you got slots that you can move them, EQ, compression, um, EQ, parametric EQ, then a shelving EQ. Then you have this tape texture module, um, which is probably the first one. It's the one they did before they had the actual tape emulator module. And even the widener here is what later on was in the Rupert Neve designs. And you have here
Massive passive?
massive passive, the mastering version.
Yeah.
Um,
Beautiful.
here the Magic Death Eye compressor, the Maslick MLA4, the Michelangelo EQ, a modified 2500 API, the Magic Death Eye color box, Weiss EQ with dynamic EQ and linear phase, the Maor Appelbaum mastering foot control system, the Workshop LTD, Saturator clipper, Maslick mastering console, MTC1X, the Rupert Neve design, uh, MBP, master bus processor, the waves. I don't know if you see it here.
Yeah, is it the Waves L2 or is that something
Yeah,
else?
the
That's
Max VCL. Yeah, it's hard to see it here because it's under.
yeah.
Then you
Oh, there's
have
the L2.
then you have here a Waves L2. Then you have here, this is a new unit. It's the Whitestone
Oh yes, I
P331.
saw that when it debuted. I forget if it was AES or NAMM, but I do remember seeing that when they had the prototype out. How do you like it?
It's amazing. I like it, really. It's very subtle, but you can feel it and hear it, and you can feel what it does, or you can hear the sheen, and you can use it minimal, and it does enough, or you can kind of push it.
And it's kind of is it a tube and solid state saturator? Is that the idea behind it? I'm trying to remember exactly how they.
It's a tube loading amplifier. There is a solid state section in the gain and the if you want to gain it later on, but it's basically a tube loading amplifier.
Interesting. And what is that concept of a loading amplifier? How do you describe what that is?
It's like pushing into the tube, how much you push into the tube. So you control
but
how
without
much
increasing gain as you're increasing the load on the tube.
It has a padding thing where you can push hard and it will lower down the volume.
Interesting.
Or you can put it without padding and do pushing hard and then gaining up, or little and then gaining up again, like an amplifier. I think this is a really good unit. Really
interesting.
I've done a lot of records with it.
It's one of a few saturators. It looks like you got the saturators in your custom foot control piece. You got the saturators in the masterpiece. You've got that saturator. You've got the head, which we haven't gotten to. You have the Crane Song head there, which has some saturation features built in. So you've got a lot of colors to choose from.
Yeah, and I have a Maslek MEA EQ.
One of the most neutral and useful EQs out there. I worked on one of those for a while at JLM. There's a reason it's in a lot of mastering studios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also very easy to use. It's
totally
because half a dB does enough. Mm-hmm. You don't need too much. Then I have
the what is this red one?
Yeah, that's a Sonic Farm Creamliner 3.
Creamliner, yes, I've heard of that. Is that another kind of more color saturation kind of box?
It's a tube buffer kind of like, and it's very subtle, and you can choose between triode or pentode. The triode is a bit more colored, and it has either transformer or solid state, and it has like a kind of a fixed EQ here.
Right. And are these your converters to the right? You're coming in and out of some Lynx converters for your A to D and D to A?
The Lynx is a D2A for monitoring, and the Benchmark DAC1 is a monitoring as well. And for D2A, A to D, it's going to be hard to see this because I put a net because...
Oh, you have a burl below. So what's that one on the top?
Yeah, I have two DAs. One is the Latte JCF Audio Latte, and the other one is the Crane Song head, which is the Quantum. And then on the A to D, I have three A to Ds. It's the JCF Latte, JCF 88. They're just covered with nets because there's knobs of calibration knobs, and I don't want to move them. Right. And then there's the Burl.
Mm-hmm. And then there's an Antelope there.
Yes, as well. That's the clock. I have two clocks here. And then I have some more gear here. I don't know if you see it.
Ooh la la, there's that big SPL, the Iron. That's another relatively more recent but coloration one as well. And then it looks like, is that a Millennia EQ?
Yes.
And then there's another converter, an Apogee up there. That's an older Apogee.
That's converter. A clock. It's a big one. Yeah, I have three clocks here.
Wow. You've got more clocks and saturation boxes than I've seen anywhere.
Well, clocks, it's, England time, America time, there's different times, there's different clocks. The Millennia is an NSEQ4. Mm-hmm. It's a later version that doesn't have the tubes. It's a solid state. And then the Iron. And then there's a tape deck. Then there's a Dangerous Compressor. There's a A-Design Pultec style hammer. Not hammer, EM-EQ2 Pultec style.
And then an SPL EQ.
Yeah, that's the old one with the motors.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's like they're motorized control knobs. There's an EQ that you can do like analog EQ. You can do digital recall on.
But you can only recall you can't move them. It doesn't move. It only recalls, and it's not with a plug-in or something. It's presets. And then I have floating units that you don't see. I have a Better Maker mastering EQ, the new one, with the screen, and right now it's pulled out. And then I have kind of like a bunch of stuff. Like I know it's a mess. I have a thermionic culture.
You've got so many saturators that some of them are just sitting around and can't even fit in the rack. This is just another level, Maor.
It's if you combine them all, it's gonna be like a distortion pedal.
Yeah.
And but by the way, I'm not like a rich kid or something like that I have the money to buy everything. It's just the way I work is I run the business and I let the income from the business run the business, which means I'm always about improving what I can bring to my clients. So the money that comes in from the business goes back into the business. Of course,
you're always reinvesting. Yeah.
Right. Of course, I gotta feed I got 2 kids, and I'm a family person.
Right.
But the way I work is that money comes in, I invest in the business and in the family. And I keep doing that all the time. And what happens is that to me, I don't feel like I'm staying in one place. I feel like I'm all the time moving forward, and I can supply to my clients, a lot of options, not give them a lot of options, but more a lot of options to work with the different types of clientele.
Right.
From the really low end to the high end.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. And with every dollar you, instead of sticking into a piece of gear, you stick into the bank, you end up paying those crazy California tax rates on. So if you put it back into a piece of gear, you can avoid a little bit of that too. That's me editorializing slightly. But there's a lot of really successful guys out there who have a lot of gear, who've accumulated it over the years because they're constantly working on records and then funneling some of those proceeds back into the studio. And then some new people will come in and say, man, look at all these successful guys with all of this gear. I know for me to be successful too, I need to buy a lot of gear and then try to start a studio. And it's like, you might have gotten the order of operations wrong, because I'm imagining that 15 years ago, you didn't have the amount of gear that you have now, but rather because you're doing work, you get to add on gear, again and again over time, rather than buying all the gear. And now that I have all this gear, let me go find clients. I imagine it didn't quite work that way.
Right. It's like, you got to have the clients to pay the bills, to have the money to pay for the gear. And you also move on from certain things. Like there's certain gear you like in the beginning or later on. There's certain gear you're like, you know what? I find myself less connected to that, Yeah. And you didn't see everything. There's even more, okay? But I'm not joking. A friend of mine jokes all the time. He says, Maor has enough gear for 3 rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe. But
once your kids get old enough, you put them to work, you build a second room in one of the old bedrooms, and then, you have one of them working for you.
I thought of that, but my son wants to be a dentist. He'll probably make more than me anyway.
That's right. So, maybe he can buy you some more gear.
Yeah, I'll just tell him, look, I have my teeth ache because I didn't do anything. Can you buy me more gear? No, I'll fix your teeth instead. No, get me more gear.
Mm-hmm.
No, if my son will decide he wants to be in audio, I'm not going to say no. Probably it's going to be easier for him because I'll just give him my gear.
Right.
You proceed. Give me the money. No, but it's just to close off that thing you mentioned about gear. You can do everything with anything. Mm-hmm. It's just how long it takes. I prefer, instead of working with so much, like trying to find the tone with so many pieces of gear that I don't like, that takes me more time to just find the right tone with the less pieces of gear that I like,
Mm-hmm.
Because same with plugins. There's so many plugins out. Imagine a plugin would cost the same as the gear. Would you have so many plugins in your rig?
Right.
No. So when people say, oh, he has so much gear he doesn't need, but then you look at their plugin list and they have so much plugins, it's the same thing. You have a lot of plugins. So to me, gear is like the same with the plugins. I like to have the versatility and choose what fits best and what gives me the results I want quicker. Instead of going, I want to get that analog sound. Why can't I get that analog sound? Why can't I get that, like, okay, let's just hook it up to the right piece and get it over with, you know? So if when people ask me what gear should I buy, I'm like, well, first of all, I think you need to find out what you want to do with the mastering. Some people want to work on styles that they don't need much gear. They need more transparency or more plugins. And if some people look for coloration, that's a whole trip by itself because there's so much out there.
Right. I hope this isn't pivoting too much, but as you're talking and then talking about the idea of your son maybe doing mastering instead of being a dentist.
Don't worry, he's going to be a dentist. He's not going to be a dentist.
All right. My heart won't break for you. You are one of maybe a dozen guys, at least I know, working in audio who I've met personally who are from Israel. And I don't mean have an Israeli background. I mean are from Israel and then moved to the US. And I got to say, I don't know a dozen guys who are from Ireland or who are from Italy or who are from Poland in the United States working in audio. What is, and one of the biggest companies, at least in the software world, is based in Israel. What is it about Israel that has put out a significant number of people working at a high level in pro audio, and many of them who have come here to the US? What is it about that place that there's, I think, a disproportionate number of people into music and audio production coming out of there?
I think it has to do with we don't have time to waste. We're friendly people. We're very warm, very engaging with people, but at the same time, we don't come from a certain abundance that exists here. So we really work hard to get what we do. We work really, really hard to achieve those goals, but also we come from a mentality of we don't have time to waste. Let's just do it. Like, there, if you schedule a lunch meeting, if you don't come to that lunch meeting, chances are you're not going to be doing business with that person. Here in LA, to schedule a lunch meeting and not to arrive, that's like saying hello. It's like normal. It's like, oh yeah, I couldn't make it. Oh yeah, dude, I'm super busy. Oh, okay. Okay. I don't know. To be honest with you, I came to America when I was 32. And when I landed here, my mentality, my attitude was the same. It was, let's do it. Let's work, and that's really, I think, where it boils down to. If you want to be a hard worker, you're going to work hard. It's something you put yourself into. When people say, oh, we're busy, I don't know how much busy people are. It's easy to say the word busy, but look at people who have kids and work hard and then have to deal with family stuff. I mean, that's busy. You know what I'm saying? But still, I think it's just mentality of let's get it. Let's do it.
Right. Interesting. And had you already been working in mastering before you moved to the US, or what was your career like before you arrived?
I was doing mastering in Israel as well, but because it's a different economy there, I had to do other stuff. I was a broadcasting engineer for 8 years. I was a music journalist. I was a DJ at clubs. I was helping with consulting. I did a lot, and I, kind of a jack of all trades, master of nothing, in a way. But that was kind of the way that we had to work. And also, I had bands of mine, so the mentality was not being, oh, this is what I do, and I'm very sensitive to it. It was more of I gotta live, I gotta work, I gotta survive.
Right.
And I got to do it. So
And
that's
did you find that there were a lot more opportunities when you got here, and did you find things moving faster in the right direction once you got here, or what was that transition like?
here is way slower than Israel in terms of things moving, and it's just the pace of the country. It's like you're from New York, if I, right? You're New York.
Yeah, well, I just moved up to New Hampshire, but I lived in New York my whole life, so I do work at a quite a faster pace than people in LA. I talk faster and all that good stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So if I put you here, people are going to be like, "This guy works really fast," and you'll be like, "No, I'm not working fast. I work normal. It's just
Yeah.
that's slow."
Right.
LA is slow. It's very slow, even though compared to New York or compared to Middle Eastern countries or in Europe, you know. Um, so in terms of work speed and all that, it's slower here than where I come from.
Hmm.
Of course, there's opportunities here that I got that I couldn't get in Israel back then, especially back then when I left, before I left, because when I left was a kind of a transitional time there, where today it's much better. There's more studios there and more music coming out. Um, and my first leap to America was working for producer Sylvia Massey. So
Oh yeah.
I moved to work for her. And then after living in Weed, California, working for her, later on I moved here.
What kind of
And
work were you doing for Sylvia?
she had a studio with engineers, and I was one of the
Hmm.
staff engineers.
Oh, great.
I was doing some recording a bit or assisting, a bit
Yeah.
mixing, some mastering for some stuff, kind of all around her, teching a bit.
And at what point did it start to make sense for you to transition kind of fully into mastering? How did that part of your career happen?
I actually started that in Israel, um, where I was producing my own bands, but I didn't want to really work with, like, I didn't want to mix other bands. Like, I didn't mind working with bands, but I didn't want to be a mixer or a recording engineer, and I wanted to master because I felt that that's where my forte was. Because anyway, I was a DJ. I did a radio. I had radio shows. I had a club DJing, music journalism, everything that was kind of like the other side of the music where people were listening to. So I had the connection. I had a distribution company, a licensing company. So it felt natural to be on that side. And in terms of production, I only like to produce projects that I was part of, like my own bands or my own records. I didn't have the patience to record other people, you know, let alone patience to record myself. But I think it's important to bring out your 100% or 110% if you can do that, and really focus on what you can bring the best in. And that's where I chose mastering. When I worked for Sylvia, it was I did other stuff because we were staff engineers. I was the only one doing mastering, but there were other stuff to do in the studio. So whenever there was needing for mixing or assisting or some tracking, I was assigned.
Understood. Well, Mauer, I think this has been a great conversation. We've kind of definitely covered a lot of ground here. And before we let you go for the day, I'm wondering if people want to find out more about you or get in touch with you, what are the best places for them to do that?
You can Google my name.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm joking.
Maor, that's Maor. Type it into the Google machine, and there can't be that many Maors working
No,
in
no, no.
audio.
Well, actually, Maor now is kind of a name that is. When I was born, there were not a lot of Maors, but now there are. It was a new
Trendsetter.
name in the 70s, but now it's already very common. But my website is www.maorappelbaum.com. I repeat, maorappelbaum.com. And
Hmm.
then you can find me on Facebook. I have 5 Facebook profiles. So
Wow, that's a lot.
just Maor Appelbaum or Maor Appelbaum Mastering. And I'm easy to my email is mappelbaum@gmail.com. Very easy to get a hold of me. And like I said, also Googling. And I'm always open to talk with people about their projects, and I try to accommodate as much as I can.
Wonderful. One last thing that is new for you, or at least new for me knowing you, is that you have no hair on the back of your head. I knew you as a man with a ponytail, one of the many in the legions of guys wearing ponytails and black t-shirts and audio. No more. When did you get rid of this ponytail of yours? And how are you liking the fresh domed new lifestyle that you're now leading?
Well, now I can hear the 12K better.
Good answer.
Actually, last year, I was in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And just prior to going to New York, I was like, I said to my wife, yeah, just cut my hair. And I didn't have bald. I wasn't bald. It was just short hair. And then a few months ago, I was like, yeah, you know what? I was walking, doing just a walk in the street, and there was a barber shop, and I'm like, let's surprise the family, come back with no hair. And it's fine. I mean, I had hair from when I was teenager, and then till the army, and then after the army I grew my hair again, so I had hair for a few decades, more than 2 decades, I guess.
This is not another thing. I hate to stereotype Israelis or any people at this point, but I am now realizing that thinking across like a half dozen faces of Israeli guys I know in audio, they either have really long hair or no hair at all. And I'm not making this up. I'm trying not to just stereotype people, but I'm telling you this is a fact. And you used to be one of the long-haired Israeli guys I know, and now you're one of the no-haired Israeli guys I know. I don't think they make any other type of Israeli guys in audio, at least. Maybe in other walks of life, but in audio production. There's only so many haircuts you find in audio production in general. I do have the hair these days. Since I have a 2-year-old kid now, I don't have time to cut my hair, so it's long now.
I actually have friends in audio that do have in the middle kind of hair.
Okay.
But I actually have friends. I have one friend who's bald, and it's like that was an inspiration.
It's lower maintenance, yeah.
Yeah,
but honestly, having the long hair is relatively low maintenance. You tie it up, you're done for the day. You don't have to worry about combing it. So no hair and long hair both are surprisingly low maintenance. So
no hair is actually more maintenance because after a while, when it grows, it kind of, especially I have some baldness, so
I won't tell
it shows.
Yeah.
But the response is good on this, and
I think you look friggity fresh. And I've got to say, we have covered a lot of ground today. We've even gone into male grooming. So this has been a fantastic episode. Once you get into the male grooming tips for audio engineers, you've had a good episode of the podcast. Maor, thank you again for being here. Check him out at maorappelbaum.com. Check him out on the Facebooks. You can email him, all that sorts of good stuff. Quick announcement for you guys. Come to MixCon. MixCon is happening July 27th and 28th. We bring together some of the top mixing engineers in the world to walk us through their process live in person in front of you guys, and it is 100% completely free. We're going to have Tony Maserati there, mixing legend who has worked with Beyonce and Jay-Z and all of these major hip-hop artists, but also tons of major pop artists as well. Also, we have there Dan Corneff, worked on a ton of great heavy music. We're having Jeff Ellis, longtime Frank Ocean engineer. Mike Major has worked with some great alternative rock bands like At the Drive-In, and so many more. So join us for MixCon in New York City, July 27th and 28th. Check it out at mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com. Last couple of quick announcements are SonarWorks. Thank you guys for sponsoring this podcast once again. If you want to make your sweet spot even sweeter, check them out. They make solutions that are going to make the response in your headphones that much better, the response in your room that much better. It takes like 10 minutes to use, and you have a flatter response than you ever have had in the past. Also, big shout out and thank you to the Gear Club podcast for sponsoring. Check them out at gear-club.net. That's gear-club.net. I don't know if they give as good male grooming tips and advice as we do here on the SonicScoop podcast, but those are two handsome gentlemen, John Agnello and Stu Lerman, and fine producer engineers as well. Ton of greats coming through their show all the time. Check them out at Gear Club. That's gear-club.net. Last, but certainly not least, Focusrite. You're hearing my voice through a Focusrite interface. If you find that my voice sounds silky, articulate, clean, smooth, and quite wonderful, it is in no small part to the fact that this is a totally good preamp and a totally good interface. Check them out, Focusrite.com. Focusrite makes really good stuff. And I think, is that it for the sponsors? Yeah, that's it for the sponsors. One more big shout out and thank you to Maor Appelbaum. Maor, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. See you next time.